This is module 3. In the first module, we have talked about the understanding and the objective of qualitative research. In the second module, we have talked about various common approaches used by qualitative researchers. This module precisely talks about the concept of research design. And to me, this is the most important module because it talks about the method, the procedure, the goals, and the framework that a researcher should aim for. Now, before I move ahead, again I will ask you this question: that what do you mean by research design, and is it the same for qualitative as well as quantitative research? So most of you would say, sir, research design is a blueprint, or research design is a systematic plan, or research design is a step-by-step guide to perform a research. Yes, all of you are right. So research design I have defined as a plan or protocol for carrying out or accomplishing a research. Now, most of the times you must have seen in quantitative research that before you get into the actual research, you plan the research design. In writing the research synopsis or research proposal, the most important thing that you consider is that what is the sequential model. So step 1, step 2, step 3. So you have a sequential model which is largely followed in quantitative research. Now my question is, can we follow the same model here, or do we have some variation? So the answer is that we may not be able to do this because sequential model comes up with a fixation of mind. Because it will give you a predefined steps which are not possible in qualitative research. Why are they not possible? Any idea? Because qualitative research, you have no idea to begin with that what would be my sample size. You need not to worry about the population. You need not to worry about the inferences that you can generalize for the population. So you are rather worried about your research goals and the framework to begin with. So 2-3 things that you should keep in mind before you even think about designing qualitative research. The first thing is that here we need to follow do it yourself approach rather than off the shelf approach. So there is no solution which is ready-made available. There is no sampling formula. There is no population. There is no analysis technique that is available that you can imitate or replicate. So you have to design everything on your own right from scratch till you write your paper. That means there is no predetermined starting or ending point. So it can be started when you go out and see somebody talking. It can be when you go out and see a specific culture. It can be when you visit a company and you find that there are certain problems or there are certain success stories that need to be highlighted. There is no predetermined starting as well as ending point. And most importantly, it involves multiple iteration. I will tell you my example. One of the research for which I collected the entire data in the month of April 2019, more than 1 year back. So in that research, I have kind of completed my data collection. I have completed my research objectives. I have written the paper. But when I published or when I sent this paper for the publication, the editor or the reviewers have asked for certain more input. So now I need to again go back to my respondents. So you can see it's more than a year back, and in order to solve or in order to clarify 2-3 doubts that the reviewers may have, so iterations cannot be completed until the paper is being accepted or published. So what are the components? Again, guys, I am referring the textbook by Maxwell. And that book is a complete guide on qualitative research design. And that book talks about 5 major components that a researcher must be familiarized with. And these are goals, conceptual framework, research questions, research methods, and validity. I will talk about each 5 of them one by one. So let me begin with the first one. So before you get into the journey of research or qualitative research, you need to answer that what are my goals? As a professor, is my goal to get promotion, to get publication, or is it something that I am very curious about, or there is something that the industry is actually facing, or I have read a lot of literature and I have come up with a lot of gaps in the research and I want to solve those problems, or I want to bridge those gaps. So any of these can be your research goal. So the author says it can be personal goal, or it can be practical goal, or it can be intellectual goal. Intellectual goals are most important for the researchers because for them, in order to bring a new theory or bring a new patent or bring a new intellectual property is important. But for management professors or for applied researchers, practical goals dominate over intellectual goals because there you try to solve the concerns of the industry or the concerns that you perceive that the industry is facing. But I'm sure personal goals would take priority above practical and intellectual goals for most of us. The second thing that we need to consider is the conceptual framework. Now, conceptual framework means where do you begin your research or how do you think about it? So for example, you are going for a case study method. So, do you have a prior experience of working in a company or an industry? And do you see that there is a lot of tacit knowledge that you have, and you want to actually empirically test through qualitative research? Or you have read a lot of papers, you have read a lot of articles, you have read a lot of theories, and you feel that there is a framework or there is a construct or there is a what do you call as research design that you want to achieve. Conceptual framework will begin from either your experiential knowledge or your prior understanding about the theory and research that you have read. What do you do if you have a lot of knowledge about the practical aspects and the theoretical aspects? Then you basically get into either consensus building. It happens with me a lot of time that whenever I read a lot of papers, I come up with certain ideas, certain framework, and then I try to discuss it with my colleagues or with my seniors. That sir, I am going into this field, whether it makes sense or not. Or you try to go for a pilot or exploratory research where you talk to people around, or you go to the industry people, you do a small focus group interview, or you do a small semi-structured interview, and you try to ensure that the path that you have decided or that you are planning to go ahead is making sense to the industry and the researchers as well. Step 3. Step 3 is an important step because it will actually ensure or it will help you to write down the research questions for your research journey. So the first thing that you need to take care is that how many questions shall I ask for one research paper? Are there two questions or we need to have three or four or five or more than five? Again guys, it all depends upon the goals that you are trying to achieve. If there is a specific goal that industry has given you, then you go for that one specific question only. Or if you have a few general objectives and then one specific objective, then you try to amalgamate. But my advice would be that rather than having general goal, you should have specific goals. For example, I was talking to a lot of companies about the work-life balance indicators. So I started my research question as that what kind of practices the company is facing in order to ensure the work-life balance. But then gradually I boiled down to the question that work-life balance is common, but I need to check that what are the indicators, and then I went deep into that. Then I again read a lot of literature, and then I found that there is some gap that the Western world has different indicators and the Eastern world has different indicators. So what kind of indicators that the specific industry that I'm trying to cover they follow. So from generic to specific, you need to move. And then important thing that you should do is you should insert more realistic questions rather than instrumentalist question. By realistic question, I mean that the question should be an open-ended, and the question should be like, for example, I am talking to somebody about the work-life balance. So I will say, what, if any, is the impact of extended working hour on your personal life? So it looks more realistic to the person, to the respondent, rather than I ask, how much do you score on a questionnaire or an instrument on work-life balance? And be prepared to iterate. So the research questions will also emerge, will also evolve, will also change when you go and interact with people, when you go to the field. So do not hesitate, do not be fixed with a mindset that I have only these three questions. The questions may be a little better with time. So do not hesitate in reconsidering your questions, but consider the broad research team as the same. Fourth aspect, and that is the methods. Methods include a lot of things. In qualitative research, method means what is my research approach that we have largely talked about in the second module. And then methods include my sample size, method include my data collection techniques, and method include the data analysis technique. So I think the first point has already been covered, and the fourth point we'll cover in the fourth module. So let's talk about how do you decide upon the sample size and data collection methods. Sample size is normally derived out of the population, and you need to identify the sampling frame. But in qualitative research, sample size does not matter. What matters is saturation of the data. So rather than deciding upon a sample size to begin with, you rather go in the process of data collection and gradually you decide. So the moment you feel that I have got data saturation or I have started getting same kinds of responses. So I would like to emphasize again here is that it's not important how many people you talk to, it is rather important whom do you talk to. So qualitative research, you cannot talk to 1,000 people. So you need to, the point here that I'm trying to emphasize is that you need to interpret the speciality or the niche or the special characteristics of that group rather than having a large cross-sectional data, because you're not generalizing anything. You are saying that these findings are for that particular context or that particular situation. But does Lichman say, rather, Lichman has also said that sample size can be as less as 10 also. So there is no hard rule. It's a good thing to cheer about, but many times what happens is that you may interview 30 people, 40 people, 50 people, or you do observation for about 6 months, but you end up getting nothing. I think same can happen with quantitative research also. Quantitative research, if you get a data from 1,000 respondents, but there is no model fit, then again you have a problem. So problems are there in both qualitative and quantitative, but it's about the approach and it's about the kind of question that you are asking rather than the number of the people that you are trying to get the data from. Second thing is the data collection techniques. I have very limited time, so I would just like to tell you that these are the three most common data collection techniques. Observation is most common because without going to the field, without meeting the people, without interacting them, without taking detailed field notes. We'll talk about all these things maybe in the next module if we have time. So observation is the central point in data collection. And then if you have less number of respondents and you want an in-depth information or there is sensitive topic that you want to work upon, then you go for an oral communication mode, which is an interview mode. But if you have less time or if you have something where people should confront each other and a lot of discussion should happen, then you may go for a focus group discussion. All three have their pros and cons, but largely it is recommended that a researcher should mix all these three. It should not be that you are completely relying upon the interviews or you are completely relying upon the observation. So as a researcher, you should use all three, or you may add a few more if you have some secondary data also. Now the fifth point validates a lot of things. So what kind of threat a researcher has in qualitative research? Researcher has two threats. First threat is being biased and second threat is being reactive. So being biased, I'm sure all of you are aware of that I have my own prejudice. I have my own experience. Based upon that, I will see certain things in a different way. I may have a stereotype. But being reactive means, or creating reactivity means that if I have my presence in that particular group, that group may behave in a different way. If I go out to the field and start observing things, you will find people will try to have a social desirable behavior maybe, or people will behave a little more consciously. So reactivity brings consciousness and biases is the personal prejudice. So you need to minimize both. So how do you minimize both? Is through the validity. So validity includes validity of the method that you are using and validity of the data. So validity of the method can be minimized by using a technique called as triangulation. We'll talk about it. So other than triangulation, there are multiple other tricks that a lot of researchers have shared in order to minimize the bias and reactivity. So the first most common technique that has been suggested to the researcher is that you should have a long-term participant observation. In the second module, when we talk about participant observation, we said that it's an approach where a person goes into the field and observes a lot of things and he becomes a part of the group. So it should not happen that you go and you observe the things for a day or for an hour or for a week. So you need to decide that I am trying to capture the entire nuances. So you need to ensure that you have a long term. Again, long term, there is no specific time limit. It can be 6 months, it can be 3 months, it can be 1 year. Then it depends upon data saturation and accomplishment of your goals. And then the second thing is, in order to minimize your personal bias, that you go back to the respondent and ask for the validation. You may interview some people, you will get your transcripts, and then it is advisable that you should go to the respondent and at least confirm those. I've seen people practicing this validation extensively. They go back, they ask the person to read that entire script, and then he will put a signature on that also. And then second or the third thing that you can do to minimize bias is triangulation. I'll talk about this in the next slide. In order to minimize the reactivity, what should you do? So we should have richness in the data. You should not have shallow data. You should have complete intense data in order to ensure that you have a meaning out of it. And then at times I've seen people, they try to use some numbers in order to minimize the reactivity. For example, I am doing an FGD and I have a sensitive topic and everybody is speaking a lot of narrative. Everybody is speaking their own experiences. But I just want to make a confirmation about something. So I may try to just use some numbers in order to get the discussion on one side. Or there can be other ways. We'll talk about it. For example, there is something called as content analysis, wherein you look for the keywords and you try to count frequencies of that. So sometimes you use numbers in order to minimize the reactivity also. So triangulation is a very broad concept and it includes multiple forms of triangulation. So triangulation actually means that you obtain data through more than one resource or through more than one source, and the person who is validating the data, again you should have more than one person to validate the data. Or the third kind of relation that the slide talks about is the theory triangulation, in which you try to compare and contrast theories also. So if you are trying to understand one phenomena and there are three theories that are trying to influence, so you try and compare three different theories and see that what kind of components I am able to observe through my qualitative analysis. So either you use three different methods or you use 2-3 different researchers who can interview, who can do coding, who can do validation, or you may have a subject matter expert with whom you can share your findings. And then finally you can actually do a member check or a respondent validation in order to authenticate your data, in order to have the higher validity. To sum up, so you have 5 things to achieve. You begin with your goals, you go to the conceptual framework, you ask questions, you decide upon the methods, and then you validate things. It's an iterative process. So many times it may happen that once you are validating the things, you find that there is a problem in the goal. So you have to go back to the goal and see whether there is any amendment or any improvement that I can make. I think there is a reading that you must make. This is a book by Joseph Maxwell. So please go through it. It is the Bible for qualitative research design. Thank you so much. Please reserve your questions and see you in the next module.